For the Green Bay Packers, the Super Bowl isn't just some far-off dream. It's supposed to be the standard. But man, after more than a decade of falling short, usually in the most brutal ways imaginable, that path back to a championship has never felt tougher. Welcome to NFL Nexus. In this explainer, we're not just going to talk about what the Packers should do. Nah. We're going to reverse engineer a championship blueprint. We're looking at the teams that have actually lifted that Lombardi trophy. We'll break down the Packers' recent moves, dig into the huge gambles they're taking, and really ask the question, do they have what it takes to get back to the top? Okay, let's get right into it. So this is the big question, right? This is the one that's keeping the Green Bay front office up at night, the one that fuels all the debates among Packers fans everywhere. And it's a question that's about way more than just, getting a little bit better. It demands a huge shift in how you think about building a team. And to find the answer, we can't just look at the Packers. We have to look at the DNA of champions, teams like the Seahawks and the Patriots who've walked this same road recently. We're going to hold Green Bay's current plan up against that standard. So the question isn't just, can they improve? It's, have they learned the right lessons to actually be champions again? So to really break this all down, we've put together a 5-point blueprint. And this is all based on the real, proven strategies of recent champions. These aren't just my opinions or some hot takes. These are the things we've seen work time and time again in the modern NFL. This is going to be our framework, our measuring stick for every single decision the Packers have made and every big move they still have to make. All right, here they are, the 5 pillars of our championship blueprint. And we're going to take our time with these because they're absolutely critical. First, and maybe the most important thing in today's league, you have to get a true stud, a lockdown cornerback, a guy who can just erase the other team's best weapon. Second, you got to build a deep and nasty defensive line. That's the engine room of a great defense, right? The guys who collapse the pocket. Third, build your offensive line better and smarter. It's not just about protection. It's about doing it without killing your salary cap. Fourth, you have to leave no stone unturned. This means you are relentless, always looking for talent everywhere. And finally, number 5, stay young. You have to keep the roster fresh and hungry. So now let's see how the Packers really stack up, and we're starting with their biggest, most obvious weakness. Man, if you're a Packers fan, you have seen this movie before, right? For years, it's been the same story. A high-powered offense that gets let down by a defense that just can't get a stop when it matters. It's a total nightmare of playoff exits, and that is exactly why the first 2 parts of our blueprint, getting that stud corner and building a deep D-line, are completely non-negotiable for Green Bay. So let's start with the secondary, because that unit has been a huge headache for a long, long time. The problem is pretty obvious, and it all started when their superstar just wasn't a superstar anymore. When Jair Alexander was playing at an all-pro level, that defense had a real identity, but his play fell off a cliff. I mean, the passer rating when he was targeted went from an elite 65 all the way up to over 110 last season. So what did they do? They let him and their 2021 first-rounder Eric Stokes just walk. Then they made this huge splash, signing Nate Hobbs for 4 years and $48 million. But here's the thing. Hobbs was mostly a slot corner for a pretty bad Raiders defense, and he only had 3 interceptions in 4 years. I mean, that is a ton of money to pay for a guy with a shaky track record who isn't really a number 1 outside corner. It really felt like they were just putting a Band-Aid on a massive wound. Okay, look at this slide. This right here shows you the huge and honestly kind of scary difference in how teams think. Look at the real Super Bowl contenders. The Seahawks said, we need a corner, and boom, they spent the 5th overall pick on Devin Witherspoon. He was an instant star. The Patriots, who are always smart, grabbed Christian Gonzalez at pick 17, a player the Packers actually passed on to get Lucas Van Ness, and he immediately became an all-pro. See, a true number 1 corner changes everything for a defense. But the Packers? They've been digging through the bargain bin, hoping to find a diamond in the rough with 7th-round picks. It's just a super risky strategy that hasn't worked, and it's a huge reason why their defense has stayed a problem. And if you thought that was bad, the situation in the trenches, well, it's even worse. The Micah Parsons trade was a blockbuster, no doubt about it. But it cost them Kenny Clark, the guy who was the heart and soul of their D-line for years. And then, to make it worse, they just let a solid starter, TJ Slatton, walk away in free agency for nothing. But here's the stat that really tells the whole story. In 8 drafts under GM Brian Gutekunst, Devonta Wyatt is the only defensive tackle they've taken in the first 100 picks. One guy. That's not just a bad plan. It's basically ignoring the position entirely. And then you look at the blueprint teams. The Patriots paid big for Milton Williams and used a high 2nd rounder on Christian Barmore. The Seahawks traded for Leonard Williams and then used a 1st-round pick on Byron Murphy. The Packers' approach here is just a recipe for getting pushed around. All right, let's flip over to the other side of the ball, because the Packers have made some pretty interesting choices there too, and they don't exactly follow our blueprint.
See, building a champion isn't just about getting talent. It's about being smart and efficient. The offensive line is the perfect example, and it tells us a lot about how the front office thinks. This is where we get into those third and fourth lessons, building a cost-effective O-line and leaving no stone unturned.
This right here, this is the perfect example of the gamble the Packers are taking. They handed out a massive $77 million contract to a guard, Aaron Banks. And look, he's been a solid player, but he hasn't been a world beater. That contract made him one of the highest paid guards in the whole league. Now look at what the Patriots did. They needed a center, so they signed a good, reliable starter in Garrett Bradbury for a tiny fraction of that cost, less than $5 million a year. That huge difference in spending has massive ripple effects. It gives the Patriots flexibility, while the Packers have a giant chunk of their money tied up at guard. It's a bet that could pay off if Banks becomes an all-pro, but man, it could also really hurt their roster down the line. And if you don't believe me, just look at the numbers. Big spending does not guarantee success. The Packers had the 7th most expensive O-line in the NFL, but that didn't get them very far in the playoffs. And in fact, as you can see here, most of the teams in the top 10 for O-line spending didn't even make the playoffs. This is a pretty clear sign that the Packers' strategy isn't working. It looks like they're not getting a good return on their investment. A smarter, more value-based approach, like the Patriots did with Bradbury, or what the Seahawks do by finding guys in the mid-rounds, is a much better way to build a complete team. It's about spending smart, not just spending big.
So this brings us to lesson number 4, and it's a mindset that really separates the great GMs from the good ones. Leave no stone unturned. And this isn't just some cheesy motivational poster quote. It's a real philosophy of being obsessed with improving your team all the time, through every possible way. You never, ever think your roster is finished. Now, Brian Gutekunst has definitely been more active than his old boss, Ted Thompson. The Micah Parsons trade proved that. But has he really embraced this idea across the board? Has he been aggressive enough trying to find those bargain free agents or churning the bottom of the roster? It's a huge question for the future of this team.
Get a load of this number. Over 3,900 roster moves. John Schneider in Seattle is the living, breathing example of the leave no stone unturned philosophy. The guy is just a whirlwind, constantly making little trades, checking the waiver wire, always looking for an edge. And sometimes he finds one. Just look at this year's trade deadline. The Packers' return game was a complete disaster. Everybody knew it. Schneider saw that from way over in Seattle, and he pounced. He traded a late-round pick for a guy nobody was talking about, Rashid Shaheed from the Saints. What happened? Shaheed came in and scored 3 game-changing touchdowns on special teams for his new team. It's that kind of creative, aggressive thinking that makes a difference. But the Packers' future isn't just about the players on the field. It's about the coaches, too. And this offseason, after moving on from Jeff Havley, Coach Matt LaFleur made a move that sent some serious shockwaves around the league. He hired a new defensive coordinator, a guy with a really polarizing reputation and a history of both incredible success and, well, spectacular failure. This one hire might be the thing that defines LaFleur's entire career in Green Bay. It's a massive gamble that could lead to a Super Bowl or a total disaster.
So, who is Jonathan Gannon? Well, he's a coach with 2 completely opposite resumes, and they're both super recent. On one hand, he was the guy who built that Eagles defense that absolutely dominated on their way to the Super Bowl. He's known around the league as a brilliant defensive coach. But on the other hand, his time as head coach of the Cardinals was a complete train wreck. He got fired after just 3 seasons with a terrible 15-36 record. He is the definition of a boomer bust hire. He could be the guy who saves this defense, or he could be the guy who sinks the whole ship. And man, you can see just how split everyone is on this hire. On one side, you've got the optimists. They see a great defensive coordinator who just wasn't ready to be a head coach, and that happens all the time in the NFL. They'll point out that he was in super high demand. Teams like the Giants, the Chargers, the Cowboys, they all wanted him. They think LaFleur had to move fast to get a top guy. But then you have the other side. The skeptics see a desperate move. They worry that Gannon's defensive style, that soft shell coverage that got absolutely roasted in the Super Bowl, is just too passive. They think his failure in Arizona points to bigger problems. And if this gamble doesn't work out, it could bring the whole Matt LaFleur era crashing down.
So we've laid out the blueprint for a champion, and we've looked at how the Packers' moves measure up. But there's one last huge question we have to tackle. With what they have right now, can they actually pull this off? Because when you look at their resources for the near future, the road ahead looks steep, like really, really steep. All right, let's get real for a second. Here are the facts, and they're not pretty. They don't have a first-round draft pick. That was part of the Micah Parsons trade. That makes it incredibly difficult to find that blue-chip corner or defensive tackle that the blueprint says you need. They also have basically zero money to spend in free agency, partly because of big deals like the Aaron Banks contract, so they can't just go out and buy a solution. Their entire plan now rests on their young guys developing fast. Players like Lucas Van Ness and Devonte Wyatt need to become stars, like right now. The clock is ticking, and there is almost no room for error. So that brings us to the final question, the one that's just hanging out there. The Packers can see the blueprint for a Super Bowl champion, but do they have the tools, the money, and the guts to actually build it? With no first-round pick, no cap space, and this huge gamble on their new defensive coordinator, is this whole thing just a pipe dream for Green Bay? Or can Gutekunst and LaFleur somehow find a creative way to pull off a miracle? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you believe in this blueprint, or are the Packers heading for another season of what if? If you enjoyed this deep dive here on NFL Nexus, do me a huge favor and subscribe to the channel and like this video so you don't miss our next breakdown. Your support really is what lets us make content like this. And hey, another great way to help out the channel is by grabbing one of our custom coloring books. They're awesome for kids, grandkids, or even for yourself. You can find the link in the description or just scan the QR code you see on your screen. Thanks so much for watching.